There's a hidden truth, a profound reality often overlooked amidst the relentless churn of history and the ceaseless march of events. It's the astounding, almost miraculous resilience of certain cities' urban centers that, by all accounts, should have long dissolved into dust, swallowed by the insatiable sands of time, hundreds, even thousands of years ago. Yet, defying every logical prediction and the crushing weight of history, they stand. Imagine, if you will, a city repeatedly razed by the ravenous fires of war, leaving behind only charred ruins and the acrid stench of despair that clings stubbornly to its very stones. Picture it under occupation, foreign banners snapping defiantly from its most familiar landmarks, casting a heavy, suffocating shadow over the hearts of its indigenous people. It knows abandonment too, its vibrant streets falling silent, eerily empty, save for the mournful sigh of the wind whispering through dilapidated, rotting homes. Its power stripped away, it transformed from a bustling hub of influence into an anonymous, forgotten outpost. And then, disease, an invisible, yet infinitely more brutal foe than any army, sweeps through, claiming nearly its entire populace, leaving behind only the chilling, profound silence of death. Yet, after enduring cataclysms that should have erased every trace of life, that city still stands tall and defiantly. It doesn't merely exist. It doesn't simply cling to its ancient walls or retain its name out of sheer stubbornness. Instead, it rises, again and again, with an indomitable spirit, to redefine not just its own destiny, but the very way a world thinks and evolves. So the haunting question that gnaws at our minds is this: what endowed such a place with an almost immortal life force, preventing its erasure from the historical map? And more critically, if we today were to face similar trials, could we summon the extraordinary resilience of those who came before us, or indeed, of the city itself? To truly grasp the answer, we must delve into every shadowed corner of this epic narrative, for the solution lies not in glorious battles or fierce military campaigns, but in the quiet, arduous choices made times after times everything has utterly collapsed. Some cities don't just survive the storm, they are compelled to fight relentlessly, with an unwavering, iron will for the very right to exist. And here's a question few ever truly ponder. What genuinely happens to a city, to its very soul, to the collective spirit of the people who inhabit it, when it is perpetually burned, occupied, abandoned, and ceaselessly ravaged, yet stubbornly refuses to surrender, refuses to vanish? Keep that question close as we trace the footprints of time together, for the ultimate revelation awaits us at the very end of this compelling, centuries-spanning saga. Long before names were etched onto maps, before borders were meticulously drawn, and before any careful chronicle of history was painstakingly recorded, the untamed wilderness we now know as Edinburgh was first trod upon by human feet over 10 millennia ago. These were nomadic hunter-gatherer communities, living in profound harmony with the rhythm of the seasons, leaving behind no grand monuments, no towering edifices, only a few scattered flint shards and the cold ashes of long-extinguished campfires offered fleeting evidence of their transient presence. There was no city, no dazzling glories, just a primal, raw existence, bound to the earth. Thousands of years crawled by, like slow rivers carving canyons through time, and gradually, people began to settle. They ceased their seasonal wanderings and started to take root, constructing sturdy homes and defensive walls. Driven by an innate survival instinct, they claimed the highest, most strategically vital positions, the very place where Castle Rock majestically dominates the skyline today, a sentinel watching over the land. And it was upon this naturally fortified stronghold that the fate of an entire nation, Scotland, would ultimately be decided. Yet, there's a subtle irony few perceive when gazing upon the magnificent grandeur of such fortresses. The most defensible, the most seemingly impregnable places are simultaneously the most vulnerable to attack, the most coveted prizes, for that very strength serves as an irresistible invitation, a defiant challenge to any foe hungry for power and control. Around 600 AD, a fateful decision was cast, a choice steeped in hope and hubris. A powerful king assembled 300 elite warriors, armed them, and commanded them to march south. The grim outcome of that expedition is chronicled in ancient manuscripts, a tale of tragic, almost unbelievable defeat. Of the 300 who set out, only one fortunate soul returned to tell the tale. It was not merely a devastating loss of life. It was a profound strategic failure, a mortal wound that tore open the gates for invading enemies, signaling weakness. And then, the inevitable transpired. In 638, the formidable fortress fell. Control shifted, hands changing with the brutal, swift efficiency of conquest. In that seemingly minor yet profoundly pivotal moment, everything changed forever. The land's name was altered. Din Idin, the ancient and proud ancestral moniker, became Edinburgh a new name, bearing the indelible, often painful, mark of the conqueror. At that time, however, it was still far from being a true city. It was simply a strategic outpost, a captured citadel, a symbol of dominance. Pause for a second and ponder. How many places across the globe, how many great civilizations were truly born or fundamentally reshaped, not by grand victories, but by painful defeats and irreplaceable losses? Edinburgh stands as a potent, enduring testament to that very question. Throughout the 10th century, the wheel of power continued its ceaseless rotation. The Scots reclaimed control, Edinburgh returning to its original owners. But what was truly remarkable was not merely the change of hands, but how it began to profoundly transform from a purely military stronghold into a vital cultural and spiritual heart. A king, a small chapel, and especially one woman, Queen Margaret, brought new values to this land. The quiet power of faith, the illuminating light of knowledge, and a distinctly different way of life. She did not conquer with sword and shield, but with the quiet power of influence, the gentle strength of piety, and the profound wisdom of erudition. This was the precise moment when Edinburgh's historical narrative began its powerful divergence from the path of mere conflict. For history is not solely carved in blood, not solely etched by brutal wars and the clash of armies. It is also written by exceptional individuals, those who dared to transform the way people thought, how they lived, and how they perceived the world around them. Then came the reign of David I, and this was arguably the true birth moment of the city as we envision it today. He transformed the settlement into a royal burgh, a royal trading centre, endowed with full autonomy to flourish. A long thoroughfare, later to become the legendary Royal Mile, was established, forming the city's very backbone, its central artery. Houses and shops sprang up in dense clusters. Narrow, shadowy alleyways known as closes began to organically intertwine, snaking intimately between the burgeoning buildings, creating a labyrinthine heart. If you have the chance to wander through Edinburgh's ancient, shadowy closes today, you'll realize they are far from accidental, far from mere architectural happenstance. They are living legacies, the physical imprint of a foundational decision made nearly a millennium ago, an urban design reflecting both the pressing necessity for defense and the profound pragmatism of the era. However, alongside this vibrant development and burgeoning prosperity, a grave problem was silently looming on the horizon. While the city was on the cusp of unprecedented prosperity, war was lurking, its ominous shadow heralding a new, devastating dark age. In 1286, the King of Scotland died without a clear successor, plunging the entire nation into a perilous power vacuum. And Scotland, in a moment of desperate political calculation, made a fatal error, a decision they would pay dearly for across generations. They invited King Edward I of England to arbitrate the dispute over the Scottish throne. It sounded reasonable enough on the surface, a diplomatic solution to avert bloodshed and chaos. In reality, it was merely a cunning pretext, the sinister beginning of brutal English control. Edward I, later to be notoriously dubbed Hammer of the Scots for his relentless cruelty, did not arrive to assist. He came to seize, to conquer, to dominate. Edinburgh Castle, the supreme symbol of Scottish power and defiance, swiftly fell into English hands. Royal treasures, sacred symbols of sovereignty and national identity, were stripped away and carried off as spoils of war. In that moment of profound humiliation, Scotland ceased to be a sovereign, independent nation. It was demoted to something akin to mere property, an occupied province within a growing empire. Edinburgh was no longer a flourishing capital. It had become a battlefield, a formidable fortress, yet one held brutally captive. But the story of resilience never ended there, because even in the deepest shadows of despair, there always flickered embers of hope, always quiet individuals preparing to reclaim everything, to rekindle the flame of freedom and self-determination. The year is 1314. A small band of Scottish warriors with extraordinary courage born of desperation secretly scaled the treacherous cliffs of Castle Rock under the cloak of a moonless night. They relied not on overwhelming military might, but on sheer audacity, cunning strategy, and absolute valor. With a perfectly executed surprise attack, they recaptured the castle, igniting a blaze of hope that spread like wildfire across the land. And just weeks later, the glorious victory at Bannockburn dramatically altered the course of the war, ushering in a new era for Scotland, an era of renewed independence. But pay particular attention to this crucial lesson. Victory is never the definitive end of war. It merely shifts the manner in which the conflict continues, changing the immediate landscape and the players involved, but never guaranteeing eternal peace. In the years that followed, the city continued to be burned, ravaged mercilessly by ongoing conflicts and reprisals. But then, with an almost unbelievable fortitude, it was rebuilt, each time more resilient, more steadfast in its resolve, only to be, once again, destroyed. It was a brutal, relentless cycle of life and death, destruction and rebirth. And then, a new enemy emerged, an adversary invisible, insidious, lacking armies, weapons, or the clang of steel. Yet this foe claimed more lives, inflicted more terror than any war had ever done. It was the plague, the Black Death. In 1349, this horrific pestilence reached Edinburgh. No one understood its nature. No one knew how to halt its devastating, relentless spread. Streets that once teemed with life, with commerce, with laughter, fell into a terrifying silence. Families vanished. Entire districts were obliterated, leaving behind ghost towns within the city. The city was almost completely paralyzed, engulfed in the suffocating darkness of disease and death, a living tomb. Imagine that moment. Not the clash of swords, not the roar of cannons, but a deathly quiet, broken only by the whimpers of grief and the hacking coughs of the dying. And here is the most astonishing fact. The city survived. It always found a way to survive, to endure, with an almost unbelievable iron will that defied extinction. By the 15th century, Edinburgh rose powerfully, establishing itself as the true centre of Scottish might, its heart beating with renewed vigour. Kings were born, crowned, married, and died within these very ancient walls. The city was no longer a mere military outpost or a besieged fortress. It had become the beating heart of an independent nation, a vibrant capital. However, even at the zenith of its glory, tragedy could strike without warning, a stark and cruel reminder of fate's unpredictable twists. A powerful king was killed, not in battle, not by an enemy's hand, but by a tragic freak accident involving his own cannon. It's a powerful lesson. Sometimes, history doesn't require the hand of a foe to be brutal, to sow tragedy. Randomness and misfortune can be just as devastating. Then came the tumultuous 16th century, an era where events unfolded with incredible rapidity and violence. Another king fell in battle, 10,000 Scots perishing in a single day, an unforgettable national catastrophe that scarred the psyche of the nation. The city plunged into such panic that new defensive walls had to be constructed with frantic urgency, a desperate attempt to protect what little remained. But even that was not the worst of it. In 1544, a brutal, chilling order was issued from the north: burn Edinburgh. And they did just that, with ruthless efficiency. For 3 days and 3 nights, the city was engulfed in an inferno. Thick smoke billowed skyward, blackening the entire heavens, stretching menacingly to the very horizon. This was no ordinary warfare. It was a deliberate act of annihilation, a savage attempt to break the very spirit of a nation, to obliterate its will to resist. Consider that moment. The intent was not merely to win a specific battle, but to instill ultimate terror, to force capitulation through absolute, unadulterated brutality. But astonishingly, it didn't work. Scotland did not surrender. Their spirit remained indomitable, refusing to be extinguished. And then, a legendary figure emerged, her destiny inextricably linked to the city's fortunes. Mary, Queen of Scots, a young queen, sharp and intelligent, yet tragically trapped within a harsh city and a court rife with suspicion and conspiracy, a place that forgave no mistakes, tolerated no weakness. What unfolded thereafter resembled a classic tragedy with no escape, a relentless downward spiral. Her most trusted friend was brutally murdered before her very eyes. Her husband was mysteriously assassinated. One misguided decision followed another, each pushing her deeper into a chasm of despair and isolation. And ultimately, she lost everything: her throne, her power, her freedom, and eventually, her very life, meeting a tragic end. The most terrifying aspect was not failure or death itself, but the profound sense of utter isolation, the crushing realization that there was truly no one left on her side, no one to trust. The 17th century brought yet another wave of chaos and upheaval. The king departed Scotland, taking the court with him, leaving a vacuum. Religious divisions ran deep, igniting bloody riots right within the sanctity of the churches. Plague, once again, returned with renewed terror, sweeping through the populace. Armies occupied the city, transforming it into a colossal military encampment, a land under siege. And then, a wrenching, historic decision was made, one that would redefine Scotland's future. In 1707, Scotland officially united with England, forming Great Britain. Edinburgh lost its own parliament, its political power, its hard-won status as an independent capital. A city that had once been the beating heart, the very centre of a nation's power and pride, now became merely a part of a larger entity, subsumed into a vast, burgeoning empire. The populace took to the streets in fierce protest, expressing their profound outrage and sorrow, their sense of betrayal. But the decision had been made. History had irrevocably turned a new page. And this is where Edinburgh's story took an entirely unexpected turn, undergoing an extraordinary transformation that few could have foreseen. Stripped of its political power, its central role in governance, Edinburgh did not retreat into obscurity, did not fade into a forgotten provincial town. Instead, it forged a new kind of power, intellectual power. In smoke-filled coffee houses, in small yet passionately vibrant lecture halls, revolutionary ideas were born, thoughts that would fundamentally alter how the entire world perceived itself. This was the era of giants. David Hume, with his groundbreaking philosophy, Adam Smith with the foundations of modern economics, James Hutton with the revolutionary science of geology. Not mighty armies, not the coercive authority of kings and queens, but the sheer, undeniable force of thought, of reason, of knowledge. This was one of the most critical turning points, profoundly redefining the city's enduring identity. Edinburgh was no longer merely a city of swords and strife, a fortress perpetually under siege, but a luminous beacon of intellect, a guiding light for the world. However, while intellect and ideas flourished brilliantly, painting a golden age for some, the practical lives of the people in the old town deteriorated to an unprecedented degree. The city was grotesquely overcrowded, filthy, and suffocatingly cramped beyond endurance, a stark contrast to its intellectual grandeur. And the bold, ambitious solution? Build an entirely new city. One part, grand and magnificent, designed for the wealthy, the elite, a shining testament to progress. The old, dark part, with its squalor and crowded closes, was left behind for the impoverished masses. This was not just an ambitious architectural undertaking. It was a profound social stratification, meticulously creating two parallel worlds within the same urban landscape, side by side yet worlds apart. The 19th century ushered in both dazzling glory and chilling darkness. Infamous murders, committed to sell cadavers to burgeoning medical schools, spun terrifying tales that haunted the entire city, casting a long shadow over its enlightened reputation. But it was also here, in those same shadowy closes and dimly lit lanes of crime, that inspiration struck Arthur Conan Doyle, leading to the creation of the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes. Edinburgh, with its dual nature, became a city of sophisticated crime and of acute deduction, a stage where the piercing light of reason wrestled fiercely with the primal shadows of human instinct. As the 20th century dawned, world wars erupted, tearing across continents. Young men left the city, carrying hopes and promises for a brighter future. Many never returned, leaving behind gaping wounds that would never fully heal in the hearts of those who remained. Yet, after all the loss and devastation, the unimaginable suffering, something truly miraculous occurred. In 1947, instead of merely rebuilding with steel and stone, focusing only on material reconstruction, Edinburgh chose to rebuild with culture, with spirit, with humanity. They organized an international festival, music, theatre, art. In a world that had just endured years of brutal warfare, where humanity was fractured by hatred and loss, Edinburgh chose to knit people back together through the unifying power of beauty, the healing force of creativity, and the universal, transcendent love of art. And this, then, is the profound answer to the question we posed at the outset. How did a city survive, not just once, but through all these cataclysms, these devastating wars, these horrific plagues, these relentless transformations? It wasn't because it was never destroyed. On the contrary, it was ravaged countless times, reduced to ashes again and again. It was because each time it was destroyed, each time it stood on the brink of annihilation, it chose to become something new, a different, more evolved version of itself. From a strategic fortress, it transformed into a bustling commercial hub. From an occupied capital, it became a dazzling cradle of knowledge and enlightenment. From a city stripped of political power, it evolved into a global cultural icon, a symbol of artistic revival. It was a continuous process of relentless reinvention and profound adaptation, a testament to an unyielding spirit. However, there is one unspoken truth that Edinburgh's grand history doesn't explicitly reveal, a raw reality hidden behind the timelines and the great names, and perhaps we need to speak for it. Cities don't feel pain, walls don't know fear, but people do. Imagine a mother in the grim year of 1349, her face etched with despair, standing before a stout, closed door. Her eyes, bloodshot and raw from weeping, stare fixedly at the rough wood, knowing with an agonizing certainty that behind it, her entire family writhes in the throes of the relentless Black Death, a plague for which there was no escape, no solace, no cure. The air around her is thick with the scent of fear and death, a haunting echo of the life that is rapidly fading within those walls, each breath a silent prayer. Imagine a young soldier, barely a man, scrambling up a treacherous, unforgiving cliff face under the cloak of a moonless night. His breath comes in ragged gasps, not from a thirst for glory or the thrill of battle, but from sheer, desperate necessity. There is no other choice for him but to fight, to pit his youth and strength against the overwhelming odds, driven only by a fierce, primal urge to protect the tender, fragile things he holds most dear, his home, his family, the very ground beneath their feet. Imagine a young, vibrant queen, perhaps the most beautiful woman in her court, watching with dawning horror as her inner circle, once trusted friends, now scheming courtiers, peel away one by one, each defection a poisoned dagger to her heart. She is left utterly alone, a solitary figure caught in the suffocating vortex of power, betrayal, and relentless conspiracy, the weight of her crown becoming an unbearable burden rather than a symbol of triumph. History, we must understand, is far more than the desiccated timelines and grand, impersonal events diligently chronicled in dusty tomes and academic scrolls. It is not merely a parade of kings and battles, treaties and declarations, a dry recitation of facts. True history is, at its heart, the profound aggregation of countless small, intensely human decisions. These are the choices made in the crucible of life's most abysmal, most trying circumstances, where individuals were thrust before existential crossroads, forced to confront the stark, often brutal, realities of life and death, of hope and despair. And if the epic, millennia-spanning saga of Edinburgh bequeaths us one singular, most profound lesson, it is this unvarnished truth. Progress is never a smooth, unswerving ascent, nor a gently rising path laid out with ease and comfort. It is, rather, a relentless, often agonizing cycle, a harrowing succession of catastrophic collapses and devastating defeats, followed by fiercely resilient, pain-laced, yet unwavering acts of rising again from the depths. The generations who preceded us paid an incalculably steep price for their existence and for ours. They paid in the currency of brutal wars, in the agonizing grip of ravaging plagues, and in the profound, often irreparable damage wrought by monumental mistakes that, once committed, could never truly be undone. We, the inheritors of their struggles and their triumphs, may not today confront the same direct, bloody battlefields or the rampant, visible horrors that besiege them relentlessly. Yet, we are undeniably facing our own set of existential choices, momentous decisions that will irrevocably sculpt the very fabric of our future and dictate the fate of the generations yet to come. The choice to painstakingly build up, nurture, and safeguard the hard-won values, institutions, and achievements passed down to us, or to carelessly allow them to crumble and be destroyed through apathy or neglect. The choice to truly learn from the annals of the past, to absorb its bitter, crucial lessons, or to blindly repeat its most painful, self-destructive errors, condemning ourselves to an endless cycle. The choice to rise with defiant resolve after every setback and every failure, or to simply surrender, to passively yield to the relentless weight of adversity, giving up the fight. And perhaps, the single most critical question we should ask ourselves is not merely times how, times Edinburgh, this ancient, enduring city, managed to survive and flourish through millennia of tumultuous change and relentless upheaval, but rather, when it is times, our times turn to confront the unique crises of our own age, to grapple with the monumental challenges that define our time. What version of ourselves will emerge from the crucible of that experience? How will we reinvent, adapt, and transform in the face of our own trials? If this narrative has stirred within you a profound sense of introspection, if it has resonated deep within your spirit, then I urge you to hold its essence close, to keep it firmly etched in your mind. Do not dismiss it as a mere historical anecdote concerning some distant, ancient city detached from your own reality, but rather embrace it as a potent, visceral reminder that everything you behold, everything you possess, everything you take for granted today can, in the blink of an eye, be irrevocably swept away, lost to the relentless currents of time and change. It is, fundamentally, the way you choose to rise again from the ashes, the manner in which you confront utter devastation and embark upon the arduous, painful path of rebuilding and reinvention that will truly define who you are, forging the very core of your character and shaping the lasting legacy you ultimately bestow upon this world. If this story stayed with you, do not let it end here. Take a moment and ask yourself one question that most people avoid. If everything you have today was taken away, what would you rebuild first? Write it down, even if it feels uncomfortable. Because the moment you put that answer into words, you begin to see what truly matters. And if this story made you see history differently, share your thoughts. Not for attention, but because someone else, somewhere, might need to hear exactly what you discovered today.